Every year I know we gonna go hard. We been that team ever since Bart started. All my cheese heads go pack go. Ain't showing no mercy, cutting no slack, no. I ain't a bad sport and I'll even wish you good luck. Only thing I will.
Hey, good afternoon. Welcome into Lombardi's Legends podcast. I am Wags, and with me as always is Dane. And here we are recording on a Sunday afternoon on the eve of free agency. Looks like Dane might have had some technical difficulties, but we'll try to get him back in here shortly. But yeah, we're ready to go and get started with NFL free agency. Can't wait to dive into it. Dane, before we do that, looks like we have you back. Before we dive into looking at maybe some of the positions of needs and available free agents, and maybe a couple of guys that are supposedly on the trade market that the Packers could go after. We'll speculate a little bit what the Packers might try to do. Let's take a peek back. I know last episode we talked about the Packers free agencies and who we thought they would try to bring back. And I don't think we have any surprises there, led, of course, by Brandon McManus. We said last time we thought that he might be their priority of all of their free agents, and he definitely was based on the moves that they've made so far. So just scanning through who the Packers have bought back before free agencies officially started. What are your thoughts, first of all, on their decision to bring back Brandon McManus? And Dane, it looks like he might be frozen. So tell you what, folks, we might need to regroup and restart. So we'll go ahead and get Dane back and probably restart here in a few minutes.
I think I'm back, Wags.
Oh, you are there. Okay, beautiful.
All right. Sorry about that.
No problem. I
little
set you
technical
up here.
difficulties. But
Thoughts on the
Brandon
Packers
McManus.
bringing back Brandon McManus?
Yeah, so McManus, great signing, I think, re-signed by the Packers. 3-year contract, not costing very much at all on the front end of the deal either. I saw online, I thought a really good way to kind of get a bearings of this contract is the 16 practice squad contracts cost more than Brandon McManus this year. So it's a good contract for everybody involved. McManus gets some security. He's 34 years old. Green Bay Packers get their kicker. Don't have to tell anybody that listens to this podcast that kicker was a big challenge over the last year and a half before McManus came in. It completely solidifies the position going forward. And Wags, I mean, good teams can get by sometimes with not good kickers. Great teams don't make it too deep if the kickers are missing field goals in playoff games. So it's really important to, I think, get that kicker. He's locked in. Really good signing for the Packers.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, some of the other moves that the Packers made, maybe you could argue are I don't want to say on the fringes, but none of the guys that they've re-signed at this point are high-priced free agents, obviously. But Zane Anderson, Emmanuel Wilson, I think notable that they decided to re-sign him, bring him back after a fine season last year with the Packers from a running back position. And then Isaiah McDuffie, I think, is another guy that certainly the Packers have a decision to make. Started a bunch of games last year, was very productive. Ultimately, it looks like they targeted McDuffie perhaps over Eric Wilson. McDuffie, of course, a little bit younger, 26 years old, maybe has some of his best years in front of him. Eric Wilson was a very productive special teams player and spot starter as well. So we'll see what happens there. And then, of course, Bo Melton, Kadeem Telford, and I think I mentioned Zane Anderson, but I can't remember if I did. So I'll just throw his name out there again. All of these guys, I think, again, last time we talked, we felt like we're probably the ones that would make sense in the list of free agents that the Packers have. It's clear that they prioritized bringing these guys back, and not to say that there aren't a few others that are still available that they won't. But Dane, anything that stands out to you from that group or any surprises there?
No surprises. I'll add Daniel Whelan also got extended too, which is great for the Packers. Just another steady specialist, right? So excited about that because all of a sudden the Packers have had a lot of flux in their specialists over the last number of years. Whelan kind of started it off as being the anchor over the last 2 years. So it's nice to just kind of have some stability there. No surprises, Wags. I'm curious your take. The Zane Anderson move was particularly I'm excited about. Actually, I thought that Zane played some really good ball at the second half of the year, and he's always really good on special teams. But as a fill-in guy, he was really missed, I thought, Wags, down the stretch last year at safety when Williams got hurt, the phenom rookie that played some really good ball for the Packers. So just some added depth there, but I wouldn't be surprised if Zane Anderson gets more run this year defensively as well. So kind of a sneaky signing there. And then Emmanuel Wilson will be the other one I want to highlight in particular because he had a breakout year last year, over 500 yards of output for the Packers, really steady running the ball, always falling forward, getting better and better in pass protection as well. Kind of reminds me a little bit, Wags, of Jamal Williams in how he runs the ball. He's a sturdy back that's aggressive and takes on tacklers. So really good, I think, signing by the Packers to bring Emmanuel Wilson back. And I would argue running back might be one of the deepest position groups in Green Bay going into the 2025 season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's pretty evident. We would have been surprised if the Packers bring, and still will be, I think, if the Packers bring AJ Dillon back at this point. I'm not sure if he's going to continue his NFL career or not. We'll see what AJ's plans are as things unfold. But it seemed pretty clear that the Packers liked what they had with Emmanuel Wilson, and you're spot on there. I think one other guy I failed to mention was Aaron Mosby. I think he's someone that they've been watching closely, especially in the wake of trading Preston Smith. He got a few more opportunities out there on the defensive side of the ball with a few additional snaps as well. So, all right, Dane, let's move into then some of the free agents that are available, if you don't mind. And yeah. I think what we'll do is let's just maybe look at positions of need. And for me, I know some fans are going to say we need a number one wide receiver. Wide receiver always seems to be the hot topic, and I am anxious to talk about that position group. But I'll be very surprised if defensive end / edge is not where the Packers are going to try to invest the majority of their resources in being extremely aggressive in free agency. So Dane, MO for Goody that we've seen over the last 3 to 5 years as he's brought in more free agents than Ted Thompson ever did under his regime. He's really looking for that guy that is maybe coming off of his first contract in the NFL. So can he come in and aggressively steal someone that's in that probably 25 to 27 age window, maybe get some of his best years of his prime and invest there. We've seen it over the years, time and time again, including last year, obviously, with the two banner free agents that they bought in. So when you look at this defensive end list, Dane, I think you said it during the Super Bowl. Josh Sweat is your guy that you're probably going to want to be targeting, and he fits that MO, doesn't he? I believe he's 26 years old with Philadelphia. The Eagles coming off of a Super Bowl victory. I'm sure they're going to try to do everything they can to extend and keep Josh Sweat. But you just saw they invested a ton of money into Saquon Barkley. They gave Zach Bond a huge deal at the linebacker position, and a lot of folks around the league were surprised, didn't think they'd have the resources to bring Bond back. They prioritized that. I think for the Eagles, they're probably in a situation they're not going to be able to pay everyone. They've got a high-priced roster as it is. Could this be a guy, and the Packers aren't going to be the only one, but could this be the guy that fits the MO for the Packers to go after at the defensive end position?
Absolutely could. And I know there's other guys potentially hitting the free agent market. Trey Hendrickson from Cincinnati also is potentially on the trade block. He's another guy I would adore seeing in Green Bay. But when we're talking about the Packers, you're spot on, Wags. Number one is they really do fit an MO when they hit free agency. I don't expect them to go after Khalil Mack, for example. Just he's 34 years old. I don't see the Packers. That doesn't fit what they do there. But somebody like a Sweat, he's great age. He's coming off a good year. He's got deep playoff experience, right? He's another kind of locker room kind of guy. He's kind of on his upward trajectory right now. And he's big, he's athletic, got a high motor. He does a lot of the stuff well, and we saw him do it well against the Packers in the playoffs. We saw him do it well against the Packers in Brazil, the first game of the year. So we've seen him play a couple times very intimately as well. Exactly fits the bill kind of person that you want to kind of bring into your organization. And I agree, the Eagles only have so many resources. So whether it's Green Bay or somewhere else, I would probably expect somebody like Sweat to hit the free agent market and probably ink a new deal. When I look at Green Bay, their end position in particular, you mentioned it last year. We hit a couple free agents that were just big, and they were huge pieces. I can't really envision the 2024 Packers without Xavier McKinney and without Josh Jacobs. They were probably two of the premier guys on each side of the ball for Green Bay last year. But I go even further back into Goody's bag and think about the Smith brothers signings, right? Where they throw two guys. Even last year, between free agency and the draft, the safety position was completely remade. So I think that this front office and Goody has an appetite for identifying the biggest issue on a roster and being extremely aggressive in addressing that issue. So Wags, whether it's free agency, whether it's a trade, whether it's the draft, I think that they are going to go after this end position pretty aggressively because the defense played really well last year for big pieces of it. Can you imagine how much better they'd be if the DBs didn't have to play ball for 4 or 5 seconds because the quarterback had that much time to hold on to the ball? So I think a lot of people look at the cornerback position, which there is a need there, but it's not as high if you're getting after the quarterback, and that's really what it comes down to. And I think that free agency and probably the Sweat kind of player makes a lot of sense, but I wouldn't be surprised if they double up either in free agency or also free agency and the draft to address the needs there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the one thing, and we'll talk about the guys that are available to trade, and you mentioned Hendrickson, or maybe let's just dive into that one now, since you've mentioned his name a couple of times. Dane, he, by all accounts, says he wants to stay with Cincinnati. Cincinnati supposedly has a big offer on the table, and they think they're offering enough. We saw Max Crosby just completely remade the market for this position group. Crosby's, I think, 27. Hendrickson's 30. Obviously, Hendrickson's been highly productive. I believe he's had 17 and a half sacks the last 2 seasons. So normally he's a guy that's 30 ticking up in age isn't someone that does fit that MO. But let's talk about Hendrickson first, because there are a lot of quote unquote names in this position group that are in that, I think, slightly higher age range than the Packers normally target. And not all of them, I think, would make sense for the Packers target. But if you get the right guy, is that something that could, and he can be productive, is that something the Packers would look at? Hendrickson, though, if he's looking for more of that 32 to 33 million a year type contract to at least be in the range of where Crosby was, I think he got 35 million a year, and you have to invest in whatever resources you need to trade to the Bengals. I just don't see that one. I don't think that's realistic at all. I know you said you'd love to have him. So please tell me if you disagree that the Packers could figure out a way to put together a trade package that would entice the Bengals. But I just don't see the Packers being the team to be able to put together the resources, nor being the team that would, quite frankly, want to put together the amount of resources that would require trade for a guy and instantly have to sign him to maybe one of the highest contracts on the entire market.
And that's the other side of the coin, right? Is like, there's the player side of things. He's tremendous. But the question I think that the front office has to ask themselves, and us as fans do too, is, are the Packers one huge splash play or player away from that's all we need? And I don't think the answer is yes here, right? So I think that we're close. I think we're tier 2 right now as a team, as far as like a threat to winning a Super Bowl. But do you go with a guy who's maybe already on the market that's going to make demand a lesser salary, and then also use a draft pick instead of, say going towards somebody like a Trey Hendrickson? Do you use that draft pick on another edge rusher or a defensive tackle or whatever that ends up being? And all of a sudden now you've got a guy who maybe doesn't put up 17 sacks a year, but shoot, can he sniff 9 or 10 sacks, right? And pressuring the quarterback. And then you also have another player that you can throw into a rotation. And I think that the Packers are closer to that, certainly, than going all in on an edge rusher. I mean, I think about the Chicago Bears a number of years ago. I already talked about Khalil Mack. I'm going to say it again. Remember when they put all their resources into Mack, and everybody was freaking out that the Packers let the Bears get Mack and the Packers didn't sign him? The Packers decided instead to go sign both Smith brothers, and they got Adrian Amos that year. And all of a sudden, the Packers were in an NFC championship game not long after that. So it's all about how you use your resources on things. And I would agree, Wags, end of day, the cost of admission just to get Trey Hendrickson on the field in Green Bay is going to be probably too steep for the Packers, especially when there are a number of other more positive options. Maybe not more positive, but also positive options that the Packers can try to add to their team.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take a look at some of the other names that are out there as actual free agents then. And I mean, I'm just, for everyone out there, I'm utilizing Spot Track, free agency tracker. So based on information that's updated here at the time of recording, and these names that I'm listing aren't necessarily the order that I prefer. I'm just reading off of what they deem as the highest previous annual value of what they were paid in the last season. So so that doesn't mean that's what they're going to get this year and moving forward. But Joey Bosa is at the top of that list. The Chargers decided to move on from Bosa. He's going to be turning 30 years old this next season. Has really been battling injuries the last few years. And so clearly the Chargers have decided that now is the time to move on from Bosa. I'm just going to read through a few more of these names, Dane, and then maybe I'll ask you to comment and give your thoughts on if any of them make sense as targets. You've already mentioned Khalil Mack is not someone that you expect. The other incumbent defensive end from the Chargers, 34 years old. Von Miller was just released by Buffalo. He's going to be turning 36. Sounds like Buffalo and Von would like to work out a deal to bring him back at a lower price tag. But I don't know that he fits the bill based on what Packers are typically looking for. And then a couple other guys here. Harold Landry, who was with the Tennessee Titans. He's going to be turning 29. Draymond Jones and Hassan Reddick, who's been a big name guy around the league for a number of years. Certainly had not a very notable season with the Jets after they acquired him, but he's available as well. And I'm going to say Matt Judon is the last guy I'll mention there. So all of these guys, Dane, are close to, if not pushing, that above 30 age window, with the exception of Harold Landry and Draymond Jones. I really like what I've seen in Landry. He's a guy that probably not a lot of folks are as familiar with, having spent some time in Tennessee. But what if any, names stand out to you in that list of guys that I just mentioned?
I think you're right. Landry's probably he's not the sexy name, so to speak, but he's definitely somebody that can get after it. And adding him to an already, there's some pieces in Green Bay already. So I think that adding him to that list of players in Green Bay as part of rotation wouldn't be the end of the world there. I also, I mentioned Sweat, really like him. That's probably my number one guy, if I'm being completely honest, in Philly. And then, his name's escaping me. Forgive me. I don't have the list in front of me, but there's a guy from the Colts, number 54 for the Colts. That's just another guy who I think can get after it as well. I think that the key there, the Hassan Reddicks of the world don't really excite me. He's a guy who didn't play a lot of ball last year, has had some contract issues, and, it just doesn't really excite me. Some of the other guys on the list, the age really concerns me. Von Miller concerns the heck out of me at 36. And going all the way back to Bosa, Wags, we say it all the time. I think that you should trademark this is that, being on the field is a skill set. And it's sometimes it's not fair, but being able to just be available is a huge part of this game. And Bosa is just not able to be on the field enough for me to feel comfortable. My expectation if he signed in Green Bay is we get 4 or 5 games out of Bosa. That's just not what I'm looking for out of free agent signing. So going back to it, I think that the Packers kind of adding kind of a what some might argue is a mid-range free agent at the end position to mix it in, and then probably getting some cover in the draft is going to be the best way to go.
Yeah, and you're thinking of Dio Odabeoding. I can't
Yes, I
pronounce
can't pronounce
his
his
last
name.
name.
Yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, sorry, and I didn't get to his name. I was actually gonna throw him in there with Sweat. I had him as another name written down, and I just moved right into the list of the other guys. So
He fits more what we do,
say,
though, right? Yeah.
but suffice it to say, none of the guys that were quote unquote the higher price, players at this position last year that are available, and then kind of just moving through, then it really starts to drop off with some of the guys. One we're familiar with in Preston Smith. DeMarcus Lawrence is another one. So I don't think either of those guys would make any sense at all. There could be a few other names out there that the Packers could be targeting that have been very productive. I think Dio is going to be someone that, again, there's going to be lots of other teams after him, just as we were talking about with Josh Sweat. But if Packers can really, if he's someone that they're really looking long and hard at, as you said, I think that was 5 years ago that they brought the Smith brothers in, and Packers have the money in free agency to really be aggressive at this position group. So I expect that they certainly will be. But I don't think it's with any of the guys that are maybe a little bit either household names or a little bit more household names. I just think some of those guys are getting long in the tooth, have had injury concerns, and generally those teams are moving on from them for a reason.
Yeah. And Wags, I mean, the other piece to all of this, I think, is that you look at the edge room right now in Green Bay, and I'd argue there's 5 guys, right? There's Rashawn Gary, there's Lucas Van Ness, there's Barre, there's Brenton Cox, and then Aaron Mosby. So that Packers, and the Packers, you could say they could go 4 or 5 deep coming out of camp. So anytime we're talking about adding somebody, we're removing a name from the list I just mentioned too, right? So there is only so much space on a roster. So if the Packers add one guy, then one guy from that list is no longer on the roster. I don't see it being Lucas Van Ness, no longer there, right? I don't see Rashawn Gary or Barre no longer on the roster. So really we're talking about squeezing out Brenton Cox or Aaron Mosby, who had, both of them showed, I thought, some promise late in the year last year. If you add 2 guys, now we're really squeezing the roster out. So that's something that's also part of consideration. That being said, we also need to be better at the pass rush. So this is something that I think that the organization is going to work through pretty efficiently here, but I do expect them to be aggressive.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll keep an eye on that defensive end group for sure. I think it's suffice it to say, we do expect the Packers to be active there. And fair to say that we and probably other Packer fans will be a little disappointed if they're not able to find someone, even if it's not maybe their number one guy. So, Dane, let's okay. I'm gonna go ahead and move over to that wide receiver position. I teased it before. Could this be a position where the exact opposite of what we just talked about, where not that the Packers just bring in an older player because they're older, but could you argue that they're going to want someone that is more established that can really, even if they're not the de facto number one, essentially take control of this position group and maybe show some of these young talented guys that we have the way a little bit and bring this and elevate this whole position group. I think we are still very optimistic and excited about the players that we have at this position, but it seemed pretty apparent that Packers want to do something here to really establish and fortify this position group. Certainly bringing back Bo Melton is great, but that's not going to be something that's necessarily moving the needle from that perspective. We really like Bo, but that's not really what we're talking about. So diving in then, the big name out there that's not a free agent, that's on the trade block. Let's talk about that first. Is DK Metcalf with Seattle. And I think there's a lot of fans out there that are excited about the prospect of being able to snag a guy like Metcalf. He's actually in that MO age range. I think he's 26 or 27, and has been very, very productive, certainly in his years in the league. The question, Dane, is what's it going to take again to acquire him? I think it's a little bit more realistic of a price tag for the Packers than the defensive end position group would be. However, it's still a question of opportunity cost. Is it worth it to go get DK Metcalf if they're going to have to part with a high draft pick in order to do so, and then potentially you're investing in paying him for years to come? So this is a tricky one. I don't think it's a question of talent, certainly, but it's a question of cost for the team in terms of assets they have to give up, cost in terms of finances, and cost in terms of fit. So first, let's just talk about it. Dane, DK Metcalf, what are your thoughts? Should the Packers get him? And what is a fair or reasonable cost from your perspective, if so?
He's a really good ball player. I think he'd be great in Green Bay. I really do think he'd be a fit. He's a physical guy. And I'm not just saying that because he's like a big dude, because he's massive, but he is a physical guy who probably fits the LaFleur offense really well. He doesn't seem to be afraid of contact. Maybe the opposite of that. Doesn't mind throwing some blocks as well. He's not the game breaker that I think some Packer fans are making him out to be. Just like he makes some huge plays, but he's not your prototypical dominant wide receiver that's just eating the lion's share of targets all the time in Seattle. He's been a huge piece of the Seattle offense, but he's not that guy necessarily all the time. But I do think he fits Green Bay really well. So from that perspective, Wags, really good ball player, does a lot of stuff really well, and I think would fit in really well with this offense. The big question mark, you're right, is what's the cost of admission for somebody like DK Metcalf? What's it going to cost to get him in? Now, I will say Seattle in the last couple of days, Metcalf has asked for a trade, which doesn't help probably his stock as far as, trading, because now all of a sudden everybody publicly knows that dude wants out. Seattle also just traded their quarterback, Geno Smith, to the Raiders for a 3rd-round pick. So I would expect that the Seattle Seahawks sign a Sam Darnold, or hell, even an Aaron Rodgers. They sign somebody else that's going to fit that position group. But still, there's a lot of flux in Seattle, meaning I think that Seattle, I could see them trading away their wide receiver, right? You trade your quarterback, I don't care what you say, you're kind of resetting a little bit. So I've seen rumors of a first and a player and a third and all sorts of stuff. I don't think Seattle's going to get anything near a 1st-round pick for the wide receiver, but I do think a 3 is definitely potential. A 3 and a player already feels a little steep to me. I've heard some people talk about the Packers throwing in Romeo Doubs or a Dontavian Wicks. I would hate that, to be completely honest with you, to throw any of our receivers back at Seattle. Could I stomach a 3? Yeah, a 4 would be better, but I could probably stomach a 3. But anything more than that, because of the cost it's going to take to pay DK Metcalf on the back end of it, I don't think that I would have comfort level in going any higher than that.
Yeah. What if it's a 6th or 7th round pick and one of those two guys?
Then probably, and it's going to be Romeo Doubs for me. I think Dontavian Wicks has a lot of potential. I mean, I know that there's been comps in the past to Davante Adams, but folks forget that 2nd year for Davante Adams was disastrous. He was not good his 2nd year in Green Bay. And then it clicked. And I feel like Dontavian Wicks, all the other comparisons aside, Wicks is a really good ball player. You can't teach dudes to get open the way that Dontavian Wicks. You just hope that guys have that ability. Wicks is a really good ball player, and I expect him to be able to sort through some of the drop issues. So I think trading Romeo Dobbs makes sense from a sense of it's not fair, but it's a reality that they had injuries do make me a little concerned. And B, he was disgruntled last year to the point that he didn't play a ball game for Green Bay. So it would make more sense there from, I think, a business and a football standpoint. Dobbs has obviously had a great output for Green Bay, but I could stomach that, Wags, with like a 6 that could even maybe go to a 5 depending on production for DK Metcalf. But if we are talking a higher pick, and I would consider a 4 or higher a higher pick, and a player that's a starting caliber player to go to Seattle, I wouldn't be able to pull the trigger on that.
Yeah, I think it depends on what really Seattle's looking to do here, right? I mean, they've got they're resetting a little bit, but
Yeah.
obviously they've got their headliner at wide receiver, and I'm forgetting his name.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And so if you're Seattle, you're asking the same questions about Romeo Dobbs as you just did.
Yeah.
If you're the Packers, I think trading a late round pick and a receiver actually makes a lot more sense than just a 3rd or 4th round pick, because look, they're going to have to make decisions in the next couple of years about which of these young guys they're going to be able to pay, because they're all kind of on the same timeline. So it kind of makes sense to me that if they're going to move on from a Wicks or a Dobbs, why not ship them out in the trade? And then you bring in DK Metcalf. He's your high price receiver for the next few years. And then I think we expect, Jaron Reed to certainly be someone that the Packers re-sign. We'll see what happens, certainly with a Wicks or a Watson, but it kind of resets the timeline a little bit, and they're able to sort of slot things out. And then if they don't re-sign Metcalf 3 seasons from now, the money kind of just can be reinvested into that next guy. So from that perspective, for cap and financial purposes, I think that makes some sense. I don't know if the Seattle side of it really works, though, because they are probably going to prefer the higher pick. It would be my guess. So it just really depends on what the market is ultimately for DK Metcalf and which young receiver, if they would want to go that route, the Seahawks would be asking for in return. All right, Dane, let's talk about a few other free agent guys. And before we talk about Devontae Adams, I want to just mention one other guy. And speaking of ACL injuries, Chris Godwin tore his ACL week 7 last year. However, could his market be a little bit lower because of that than it otherwise would? It sounds like there's going to be a ton of suitors for him still, but you're talking about a guy that maybe would have been in that T. Higgins type salary range that probably won't be because of this injury. He's still going to get a big contract, I would expect, but super productive in his time in Tampa Bay. Someone that I think also would really fit the bill of what the Packers are looking for. Yeah, he's going to be 29, but still, I think as long as his health checks out to the degree that you think it can, it's a little bit of a risk, but it could also be really high reward if the Packers are able to win that sweepstakes at the right price that they feel comfortable with. My guess is it's not going to work in the Packers' favor, and there's going to be other teams that overpay for what the Packers feel comfortable with for a guy like Chris Godwin. But I just wanted to mention his name because truly I think and for all other, throwing, you can't just throw the injury side, but for all other reasons, from a productivity standpoint, from a fit standpoint, and really just from a timeline standpoint, would really fit what the Packers are looking for if they want to bring in a headliner at this wide receiver position.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And he's a guy who, but for all intents and purposes, like, he seems like a good dude, and that matters because it is still a young wide receiver room. I think one of the biggest challenges this wide receiver room faced in year 2, kind of all together as a group, and it's not their fault at all, is that in year 1, talent just shined through. Right. It was like, whoa, these guys are talented. Year 2, part of the reason maybe we didn't get that second, big jump is because they didn't have that veteran doing some of the little stuff on the field. They have a coaching staff, don't get me wrong, but there's something about a veteran guy that's been through it a little bit, that's on the field on game day saying, X, Y, or Z. And we've talked to a ton of players over the years. You can hear when guys talk about leaders in the locker room, or you hear about leaders on the field. And so adding somebody like Chris would be, definitely sees the field a certain way, definitely understands the game of football, and has kind of been through the highs and the lows of a flow of a game. And it might just taking away his extreme talent, which he has on the field, just that added benefit, I think, off the field. But yeah, I mean, he's one of the most, for whatever reason, both Tampa receivers, and I think Mike Evans is getting more love now than probably ever before, and rightfully so. But for whatever reason, for years, both of those Tampa wide receivers have just been awesome, right? They're just good. They're a problem every week. And finally, I think Evans is getting the love because of so many 1,000-yard seasons over and over and over. But same with Chris. Like, he's just, every week he's a problem when he's on the field. And I would much rather him be on the team than face him. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Let's talk about Davante Adams.
We have to.
We have to. How can we not? I mean, I can't put it off any longer. Dane, does he, if the Metcalf thing doesn't work, if the Packers maybe aren't interested in Godwin, or he's just at a higher price range based on the market, injury, whatever, doesn't Davante Adams just make too much sense for the Packers? I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. I don't know what Davante is going to command. I can't see him commanding like a big maybe he gets 2 years at this point, but I feel like there's going to be a pretty incentive laden contract. He knows Green Bay, as you just mentioned about Chris Godwin. He's a good guy. He's consummate professional. I mean, he got his big contract with the Raiders. I mean, there may be I wouldn't say it was acrimonious on the way out the door. Obviously, he wanted the respect from the Packers to pay him. It didn't work out. I think that was more of a business decision. I think Davante Adams understands that. I think the Packers front office understands that. He mentioned don't rule out a return to Green Bay while he was on the Jets last year. So, I mean, Dane, is this just, am I crazy, or does this make way too much sense? Probably someone that you're not going to expect to be the old Davante Adams. That wouldn't be realistic. But could he elevate this position group? Yes, I think he could, particularly in the red zone, an area where the Packers really struggled last year. I think Davante Adams could elevate this this offense, and I think he could elevate this position group. Romeo Doubs is a Las Vegas guy. Davante Adams, Las Vegas guy. You mentioned Wicks is, I think, just in the mold of Davante Adams, and on and on. Reed, Christian Watson, all of these guys would be able to just step in line with Davante Adams, even if he's not going to go out there and put up a 1,500-yard season, or we wouldn't expect that, at least. I think for the price tag and for all of the reasons of his ties to Green Bay, and really for the role that he would be expected to play on this offense, I can't think of a better guy for the Packers to bring back as a veteran wide receiver than Davante Adams right now.
Well, so a week ago, I would have just, for no good reason, I would have been like, it doesn't feel right. I'm not sure. That's just my personal, I don't know why. And over the last week, in some conversations I've had with you, and what you just explained makes a lot of sense. I mean, he does make a ton of sense in Green Bay. And Wags, I mean, if you told me that going into next year, the Packers roll out in September, whatever the first game is, you got Tucker Kraft at tight end, and you got Tay on one side, you got Jaden Reed in the slot, you know, Romeo Doubs is out there, you got, Wicks coming in, like Josh Jacobs in the backfield. Holy smokes. Right. I mean, I do think that there's something to be said about that. Davante Adams is a total pro. And maybe that is the veteran thing that we're missing in that locker room, is just having a dude who's not only done it, but it's done it at a high stage, has made some massive plays in that community, in that city, right, of Green Bay. Because I do think that Green Bay is, oddly, there's a pressure to Green Bay that I know everybody talks about New York, and I get all the press and all of that. But in New York, these guys can also get lost. They can go somewhere after a bad game, and more often than not, unless you're the quarterback, Nobody's going to probably bug you because you're in New York City. In Green Bay, Wisconsin, you can be the backup left guard of the Green Bay Packers and you go bowling and people are going to be talking to you, right? So there is that added community pressure in Green Bay. It's just, it's a privilege, but it's also a pressure. So having somebody like Devontae, not only for his on-field input, and he's still 1,000-yard receiver. You're right. He's probably not a 1,500-yard guy, but he can still grab a grand for the Packers this year. But also kind of talking about what it's like to be a pro and be that guy in that community would just be huge. So a week ago, I wasn't there. A week later, I'm thinking about it. He'd be a really good addition. And I'll just add one other thing. I don't expect Christian Watson to be able to make a huge impact for Green Bay, especially in the first half of next year. I wouldn't be surprised if he's on the physically unable to perform list to start next year, because that knee injury is just absolutely nasty and it's going to take a while for him to be back. And even when he's back, I'm not sure if he's 100% back for quite a while. So adding a receiver and then maybe using that draft pick that they would have used on DK Metcalf to replenish the wide receiver room even more could be a very, very enticing option for Green Bay. I think the probably 10 to $15 million question here is, does Devontae really want to come back and play in the cold weather of Green Bay? He likes the West Coast. He likes being Green Bay. Does Aaron Rodgers end up in New York Giants? Does he want to go there? There's a lot of those question marks, but if Devontae Adams has an appetite to go win a bunch of football games and play some cold weather games and make a huge impact, it's Green Bay.
Yeah, I don't know why you would follow Aaron to New York. Like, that's not the Giants go across town. I mean, that just seems like version 2.0 of what just happened. I think if Devontae Adams wants to win and extend his career, Green Bay makes a lot of sense. Now, there's other places he could go. I'm not saying it's the only option. I mean, heck, if he ended up in Los Angeles playing for either the Chargers or the Rams, that kind of fits the bill of what you just said. And both of them could probably use a guy like Devontae Adams for that matter. So, so we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I think Devontae can live most of the year in the West Coast and in the warm weather and come play football and extend his career. So it just depends what his priorities are. It depends what the Packers want to do. We don't know that Devontae is someone that they have any interest in bringing back. I think it makes a ton of sense. You've gotten on board with that, and I think there's other fans out there that would be excited by that as well.
Wait, can I just add one thing on that? Independent of his time in Green Bay, if he was a free agent right now with what he's done over the course, his body of work, his resume over the course of his career, he'd be a good fit in Green Bay. So
yeah,
independent of our green and gold. Yeah,
there's other guys that maybe you would argue haven't been or around the same level of productivity in that age range, but I don't think would make as much sense. Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, Brandon Cooks. Those are Tyler Lockett. A couple of those are like good guys, and some of them are knuckleheads. But the reality is, I think the ties certainly do make a difference. So you can't ignore that aspect, but I understand the point that you're making, certainly, Dane. Is there anyone else from a wide receiver position? I know I didn't extensively just read through list of wide receiver free agents, but just looking at it, there's not really anyone else to me that stands out that I'd be excited about. Because frankly, I don't think it makes sense for them to go out and roll the dice on a younger but talented guy. Maybe I should rephrase that. It could, but it seems like that just adding to what they already have. I think if they're going to bring someone in, it's going to be a proven commodity, but it's going to be someone that they expect can still contribute at a high level on the field. So I don't know if there's anyone else that you had on your list at the wide receiver position. All right, well, let's move on then to cornerback. I think that's the last group that we should really highlight. You argued that I think the last couple of position groups may be a higher need than cornerback. Maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but let's talk through that a little bit. Do you think the Packers are going to try to go out at free agency at cornerback position, or do you expect that maybe it's more likely that the Packers just try to rebuild through the draft and on the margins at the cornerback position, given how much strength they may feel they have at the back end of the secondary, and hopefully being able to address and really be aggressive along the defensive front.
Yeah, so if I looked at the Packers just positions overall where I thought that they needed to make an immediate impact, I would say in no particular order, but kind of the top tier. Um, Rusher is extremely important. Wide receiver is extremely important. Corner to an extent, and I would say defensive line, defensive tackle is going to be another important position. Although I don't think that they'll address that position as much in the in free agency as the draft. I think that that's going to be maybe a primary spot, and then a lesser position is probably depth along the offensive line. I think the Packers have a starters is set right now and the offensive line. Whether the center position, is somebody, whatever. The Packers are going to have their 5, I think, already, and it's probably Josh Myers isn't part of that. But really, the cornerback position does matter. And Keyshawn Nixon, I thought, overperformed last year as a starting cornerback. I like Carrington Valentine a lot. Jair Alexander, I have no idea what's going to happen with him, but I think it's extremely unlikely he's on the roster next year. And then Wags, all of a sudden, it's kind of like, where do we go from there? Right. I mean, that's the honest answer. It's Corey Ballantyne, who's a free agent right now. I'm not looking at the roster, but it's thin. It's very, very thin at the cornerback position right now. I mean, Eric Stokes is a free agent. He's not going to be back in Green Bay. I think that they are definitely replenishing in the draft. The Packers have had very little success over the years, I think, at having impact players at cornerback. They're very good at drafting offensive linemen. They're not very good at drafting cornerbacks. I mean, that's just how it is. So would I like to see the Packers go and be aggressive and land some stud corner in the draft? Of course. But I almost feel like you got to stick to what you're good at. And maybe this is a year where they do a splash position at corner. Last year they did the splash at safety. Maybe this is a year where we see something similar, where they sign a higher priced free agent at the corner position, and then they draft somebody else just to add depth and competition to that group. Because respectfully, I know that Keyshawn Nixon wants to be corner 1. If Keyshawn Nixon's cornerback 1 this year, I don't think the Packers are going to a Super Bowl. Sorry, K9. I love you, man. I want you to play ball, but he's a part of the defense, but he can't be covering wide receiver 1s week in and week out. So I think the Packers do need to make a splash. And I think free agency is the most direct way to do that, with somebody that's going to be a more known quantity or entity than just going through the draft solo.
Okay. So I mean, that being said, you're looking at this group. I think a guy like Charvarius Ward for the 49ers has been very productive over the years. Is that the type of player that you could live with? Or, I mean, he's someone that is available as an unrestricted free agent. He's going to be turning 30. I don't know. To me, he's probably a more known quantity from a productivity and time standpoint, certainly than Keyshawn Nixon is. I don't know how much of an upgrade that is, or a downgrade that is, I should say, from when he's on the field. Certainly with Jair, but you're looking at. It's tough. The top of this free agency list is tough. I think Kendall Fuller has been productive. It sounds like he's going to try to stay in Miami. They're trying to work something out down there. Rasul Douglas, I don't see Goody. I love Goody as a GM. I don't think he goes after a guy like Rasul Douglas. I feel like he would be admitting that he made a mistake, even though maybe he would privately admit that he maybe made a mistake in trading Rasul Douglas a couple of seasons ago. But I'm not sure if there's any specific names that stand out to you, Dane, as far as who's going to clearly come in and headline that cornerback room, so that you can give, maybe a couple draft picks, a guy like Carrington Valentine, etc., time to continue to develop and continue to improve.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if we need that if we address the rush position a little bit, I'm not sure if we need that premier quote unquote number one corner, somebody like Ward. So Ward last year had a bit of what some would say a down year. He also in his personal life, and I won't get into it, had bad situation, right?
Yeah.
So like I don't blame him at all, right, for that kind of stuff. So he could end up coming back and balling out. Somebody like him, Darius Slay.
What about, hey, Dean, what about we take a page from their years of playbook, and I mean by they, the Vikings, and get someone like a Shaquille Griffin? It's kind of that mid-price corner. Would that be someone that maybe you could be interested in?
That's exactly what I'm thinking, Wags. I don't know if I articulated it correctly, because it's like you're spot on. Like, it doesn't need to be the premier corner. I think adding another guy who's done it in the league for a while would be good. So that's exactly the kind of like guy. I look at Darius Slay for Philadelphia, just got cut. Older corner, but can still hang and can still like get in guys' faces of play. He's been through the trenches forever. Just, all of a sudden you go, okay, now I've got, and I'll just use Slay as an example. Now I got Slay and K9 and Carrington Valentine, and I drafted a guy, right? Like, you're getting depth there. You're getting competition. You're getting the right guys out there. What I don't want to see the Packers do is go in with, okay, we've got K9, we've got Valentine, and now we're going to draft somebody in the fourth round. And that's good enough. Like, that's not good enough right now if we want to win a Super Bowl. So I think adding a guy and drafting a kid in the third or fourth round, now we're talking, but I just want to see another veteran presence, I think, on this defense.
Yeah. I mean, well, clearly they need depth too. So it's depth and talent. So it's a both and. But I would expect the Packers are drafting multiple cornerbacks, if not, 3, and then they're gonna try to get someone on the margins and probably sign someone in free agency. So I don't think this is a break the bank position. I think we're saying the same thing, Dane.
Yeah.
It's just there's other more, I think, more impactful position groups, shall I say, that the Packers could attack in this free agency to try to improve this team and improve their stock as far as their status as a potential contender going into next season. So, all right, Dane, we've covered it. You already said I wasn't going to really highlight the offensive line. I don't think they're going to go out and spend a ton of money, but we know Goody loves going out and getting that, veteran left tackle that's kind of been moving around the league a little bit. It was Andre Dillard last year. Perhaps you could argue they could have used Dillard late in the season, but he had, unfortunately, some injuries that he was battling. He's certainly a free agent again. So if it's not Dillard, I would expect, as you said, that'll be someone of his ilk that they'll be bringing in for that depth at that tackle or swing position. And perhaps they bring in a kind of a guy in a similar mold for the interior. Although I expect that they'll probably more likely pass on that and just draft multiple interior offensive linemen, as they usually do every year anyway, to supplement their depth there. So,
it's funny. For all of the youth they do everywhere else, for whatever reason under Goody, it's like, give me that 33-year-old tackle that can just be our swing tackle. They love to have that veteran guy there.
They really do. They really do. So, Dane, any other position groups or any other free agents or maybe trade eligible players that we haven't talked about that you wanted to throw out there before we close up here today?
No, I mean, expect the unexpected. I mean, this is the Packers, but I do think my one expectation is they are going to be aggressive in free agency. I think that there's still some Packer fans that have some PTSD from saying like, oh, they never sign guys in free agency. Yeah, they do. They do quite a bit. They're pretty darn
every year, right?
Yeah. Every year now. So I respect that. That means that you've been following for a long time, though, you fans that think they never do anything, but they do a lot. So they're going to be aggressive. They've got a ton of money to spend and they're close. So let's go get it.
Yeah, and that by aggressive, that doesn't mean that we can sign every top of the market free agent that's available. I know most reasonable Packer fans understand that, but if you want reason, listen to us and stay off Twitter, I think is a good way to go. So thanks, folks, for joining in. If you're listening either tomorrow, later today, or throughout the week, you can check off and see how right, how wrong we were. I'm sure we'll have plenty in both columns, hopefully a few where we were right in our prognostications and predictions and speculation here. But anyway, so we'll just keep chugging along here with this offseason day, and it's a fun week coming up. I'm looking forward to it. And stay patient out there, folks. But as always, be legendary and go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.
Every year I know we gonna go hard. We been that team ever since Bart started. All my cheese heads go Pack Go. Ain't showing no mercy, cutting no slack, no. I ain't a bad sport and I'll even wish you good luck. Only thing I will